In the early 1960s, I began to research the background of the man whose name, 100 years after his birth, still evokes more passionate admiration and condemnation in Ireland than any other of his generation. I read everything that had been published, but discovered very little that was not based on hearsay. I could find only half a dozen letters written by Pearse himself, and these, coupled with his published works, did not form a sufficient basis for an assessment. As Senator Margaret Pearse, his surviving sister, wasn't admitting to having any of his papers, and nor was anyone else, I gave up. But by the early 1970s, with the 50th anniversary of the Rising over, many of Pearse's contemporaries dying, including his sister, and a general shift in the political climate, documents began to appear. It seemed worth another try. I began with his father. James Pearse was born in London in 1839 into a poor artisan family, with whom he moved as a small child to Birmingham. At 8 years of age, he was sent to work in a chain factory. He loathed it and took evening classes in drawing to become a sculptor's apprentice. A mounting sense of empire demanded an identifiable style in art and architecture. The medieval fancies of William Morris and the Pre-Raphaelites had their parallel in the Gothic or Perpendicular style of building. Where England led, Ireland followed, and James Pearse, a teenager and qualified stonemason, came to Dublin in the wake of Pugin to decorate the churches that were springing up in the new confidence which followed in the wake of Catholic emancipation. He married and was widowed young. At 35, he had 2 children to bring up, a small but growing business, and an urgent need for a wife. His photograph apart, a number of elements fit together to give us a picture of James Pearse's character in his maturity. In the board of works, I found the remnants of his library: literature, history, politics, and comparative religions. They all show his successful determination to overcome the disadvantages of his almost total lack of formal education. Among his surviving papers, released only after his daughter Margaret's death, there is evidence of a keen mind trying to grapple with a wide range of universal mysteries. This scrap of notebook, for instance, shows his attempts to work out for himself the anomalies of the lunar tides. Then there is the letter which he treasured, in which the priest who oversaw his short-lived conversion to Catholicism paid him tribute.
I recollect well your sensible objections and difficulties whilst you were under instructions, and the clear-headed manner in which you saw the answers as soon as they were proposed to you by me.
There was his robust response to attempts by Catholic stonemasons to have him and his partner blacked from Catholic churches.
I am bound to admit that we are both guilty of being Englishmen, but as God in his wisdom has seen fit to call us into existence upon the other side of the water, and as his will was done in this matter and not ours, we think there needs no apology from us on that head.
And there was his hatred of cant, hypocrisy, and injustice, which led him to write and publish, at his own expense, a personal response to a Trinity professor, no less, who had dared to mock the Home Rulers. About Professor Thomas Maguire he wrote,
"I'll teach the bloody fellow a lesson. He ought to rinse out his mouth."
And the crest and motto of the family firm tell their own story. He was a self-made man in the best Victorian tradition. I'm telescoping James's development here, of course, giving you a picture of the man whom his son Patrick loved, admired, and emulated in so many ways. For Patrick was never ashamed of being the son of a Brit. He recognised his virtues too well. But self-reliant though James undoubtedly was, he couldn't manage 2 motherless children alone. He found a pretty and lively young wife in Margaret Brady, a shop assistant. An attraction of opposites displayed in their love letters. My dearest Mr. Pearse, I do be watching every post during the day to see if you are thinking of me. I think every day a week, thinking when I shall see you. It strikes me I have not the power of writing so affectionately as you have, but you know you must take the will for the deed sometimes. I was lucky that the love letters turned up. They gave me a picture of Margaret Pearse, which I couldn't have got from any other source. A well-meaning, emotional, often irrational, kind, simple girl, determined against all obstacles to marry this Englishman 16 years her senior, despite his taciturnity, his strange interests, and his often worrying iconoclasm. I trust and hope through the goodness of Almighty God you will be all right in a few days. I promise you I will pray to him for you.
It is no use saying please God this or please God that. My throat will never be well and there's an end of it. It appears to me if he is pleased in the matter at all, it is to keep it bad.
To find out about Margaret's family, I had to trace records in churches, the Customs House, the Land Registry Office, the Registry of Deeds, and the Public Record Office. And as gossips had said, Margaret was of humble origins, mainly coal dealers and domestic servants in Dublin's North Strand, a background which the Pearse family had gone to some lengths to suppress. A fragment of his autobiography, which his sister Mary Bridget published in 1935, made no mention of other than a middle-class existence. Luck vindicated Patrick Pearse. I located accidentally the original manuscript of his truncated autobiography, and found a dozen or so pages that had been torn out of the ledger before it went to the printers, and subsequently, thank heaven, clipped back in. And in those few pages, Patrick Pearse wrote movingly and proudly about the circumstances his parents were born into and the way they struggled out of them. When James and Margaret married, they lived above the shop at 27 Great Brunswick Street, with James's 2 children by his first marriage and the 4 children of their own union, Margaret, Patrick, Willie and Mary Bridget, all born between 1878 and 1884. Although James had the lease of the whole building, for the first few years of the marriage the family had to live in 3 rooms, releasing the others for tenants. Things got better quickly. The stepchildren married and left, and the young family moved into suburbs. Patrick was sent to a private school, and in 1891, with Willie, to the Christian Brothers in Westland Row. This event brought the family back to the Great Brunswick Street house, which by now they could afford to keep completely for themselves. The family business was thriving. Its progress could be charted by working through volumes of the Irish Builder. Equally laboriously, the addresses, and even the number of rooms the Pearse family occupied, could be traced from the contemporary Tom's directories. By the time the boys went to Westland Row School, the family had become decidedly genteel, although they had to conduct their domestic affairs to the sound of stonemasons' chisels. This was where the masons worked, at the rear of 46 and 47 Great Brunswick, now Pearse Street. Exposure to the business and their school life represented almost the only outside experiences which the children had. The local children played in the streets, but Patrick's reminiscences and the evidence of contemporaries show that the young Pearses played in their own home. Patrick was cosseted by his devoted mother, admired by his sisters and brother, and indulged by his father. It was a loving but stultifying environment, and Patrick very early on took refuge in fantasy.
I saw myself doing or suffering all things that were dared or suffered. Toiling across deserts, cast into dungeons, starved and flogged.
As he read more and listened to the stories of Gaelic saga from a maternal great-aunt, the images changed, and he peopled his dreams with Fionn, Oisin, Cuchulainn, and other of the Irish heroes. In 1891, at the age of 11, Patrick went with Willie to Westland Row. The Christian Brothers, charged by parents with getting their children through examinations, had little time for liberal education. The examination curriculum dominated. I traced from the examination syllabi all the books Patrick read at school, and all of which, from Ovid to Shakespeare, were instilled through rote learning. But there were two Christian brothers who fostered his early love of Irish, and privately he read widely in available Gaelic literature. In 1896, at the age of 16, he passed the senior grade intermediate, our equivalent of the leaving cert. By his own admission, a respectable but not brilliant student, although he did win a book prize at the examination. 2 years too young for university, and precociously anxious to move into new intellectual worlds, he founded the New Ireland Literary Society, a printed programme for a conversazione held under the auspices of the Society in 1897 gives the flavour of the proceedings, and indicates too how Pearse dominated the activities were. Patrick, as president, was also to deliver 3 lengthy papers on Gaelic topics to his members before he dissolved the society to throw his energies into the work of the Gaelic League. Here the studious, introverted, petty bourgeois 17-year-old, fresh from suffocating school and home, was to meet men whose names he had only read of. Douglas Hyde, gentleman, scholar, president of the Gaelic League, author of a book of folk tales which Patrick discovered in the National Library of Ireland. Owen MacNeill, the leading Irish historian of his time. Dr. O'Hickey, a Maynooth professor with a fighting disposition. For the most part, the Gaelic Leaguers were very much the kind of people with whom Patrick's mother would wish him to mix. Sean O'Casey, ever acerbic, painted them as
respectable, white-collared, trim-suited Gaelic Leaguers, snug in their selected branches, living cosily in Whitehall, Drumcondra, Rathgar, Donnybrook, and all the other nicer habitations of the city.
But for Pearse, they had an overwhelming glamour. Like him, they all believed that the most important aim of all was the revival of the Irish language and its literature. Within a short while, his enthusiasm, his regular attendance and his frequent speaking at League events had brought him to the attention of its talent spotters. A proposal for publicising and popularising public meetings had led to his co-option onto the League Executive Subcommittee. In 1898, he enrolled as a student, both at the Royal University and here at the King's Inns. And in the same year, he became a member of the League's Central Committee. He had boundless energy. In addition to his League work, he was doing 2-degree courses, he was giving talks, lectures and speeches up and down the country, and he was also writing his first pieces of journalism.